This is the beginning of Lesson 5 for September 15. We are going to start with Lesson 5, then we'll do Lesson 6, and then we'll have some type of a quiz. These two lessons will take a while, considering our short week this week, our short week next week, and the short week the week after that. The lesson will end with the end of the American Revolution. The French and Indian War was part of a much bigger war, the 7 Years' War. Now, the 7 Years' War started actually in India in the 1750s. It was over which country, France or England, owned which ports on the subcontinent of India. Soon the 7 Years' War is going to spread to Europe. There's going to be a great deal of fighting in what we would today call Germany, and then the war will spread to North America. Now, in North America, the war was all about the Ohio River Valley. By the 1750s, settlers from Virginia, Pennsylvania, and surprisingly even New York had gone into the Ohio River Valley and claimed it for Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York. The French had come down from the Great Lakes and had claimed the same river for them. Obviously, one of the two is going to have to go. The British colony of Virginia was the first to send a scouting party over the Appalachian Mountains. Now, this scouting party is going to scout land along the Ohio River Valley and begin to have the land ready for sale for the British Lord Berkeley, who had been given this land by the king. This would be King George II, for a political favor. Now, it is during this time that the scouting party is going to run into a French scouting party who's getting ready to make nice with the Indians. And although both sides sit down and talk to each other, it's obvious to both sides that a war is probably going to occur. The French and English had fought a series of war prior to the start of the French and Indian War. If we go back to the beginning of the 18th century, that would be 1700s, we're going to see wars between the French and the English over a variety of issues. The French and the English did not care for each other, and there will be other wars after this one between the French and the English. The colony of Virginia is going to send a young planter, George Washington, and a group of Virginia militia over the Appalachian Mountains to construct a fort along the confluence of the Allegheny and Monongahela River to where it forms the Ohio. This is present-day Pittsburgh. This fort, which George Washington dubbed Fort Necessity, was going to be the British attempt to let the French know they were serious about the Ohio River Valley. Well, so were the French. And in May of 1754, French and Native American troops will defeat Washington and his Virginians at Fort Necessity. Washington and his men are forced to surrender. They sign a document that basically says all of the land belongs to France. Well, now it's time for the French army and the British army to come to blows at the same spot. With the outbreak of the war, many of the colonial leaders realized that this French and Indian War is not going to touch just Virginia, but touch just about every colony. There was an attempt that maybe we should get together and decide what to do next. The meeting became known as the Albany Plan, and delegates from New York, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts all agreed to attend the meeting. Now, the idea was that they would come up with some strategy to defeat the French, and more importantly, the Native Americans who attacked their colonies. However, the plan failed because no one could agree on who the leader would be. New York suggested a New Yorker. Massachusetts and Pennsylvania said no. Nobody could agree on who would supply the army, who would pay for the army. And so the Albany plan ended in failure. So why then are we putting it in our notes? We're putting it in our notes because less than 10 years later, the colonies will side with each other over an issue which is going to affect most of the colonies, and it's going to unify them. So this is kind of the before picture, and what we're waiting for is the after picture. The Iroquois Indians, who controlled most of upstate New York, would not take part in this war, even though the Native Americans who would be coming would be the hated Hurons. The Iroquois still refused to take part. They had been burned by too many broken English promises. Now, this will be the beginning of the end for the Iroquois as time goes on. Well, in 1755, the British are going to send Sir General Edward Braddock and a sizable force of British regulars to Virginia. Now, I got to tell you, Braddock is about as good as it gets. Braddock was considered one of the finest military minds in Europe. His army was well trained, and Braddock's mission is to go to Fort Duquesne, and again, I believe that's how it's pronounced. If you know French, let me know if I've mispronounced it, and drive the French out of the fort and drive them out of the Ohio River Valley. Well, to get to Fort Duquesne, Braddock is going to need some help, and he goes to the governor, and the governor of Virginia suggests George Washington knows the land, and so Washington was made a major in the Royal Engineers, and most of his Virginia militia would act as the engineers. Now, this allowed Washington a chance to sit down with Braddock and his officers every night at dinner, and they would talk about the upcoming battle. Now, Braddock believed that he would fight the French in what is called European style. Now, the guns in those days were accurate to about 40 yards. So Braddock and his men would close to 40 yards. They would line up in straight lines. They would blast away at the French. He expected the French to do the same thing. Then each side would get 10 yards closer and they'd blast away. Eventually, somebody would get tired of this and yell charge, and both sides would charge at each other with bayonets. These are long knives that you stick on the end of the gun. And probably the guy who comes out with the most men is going to be the winner. Well, Washington told Braddock and his officers that isn't the way the French and Native Americans are going to fight. Washington warned them that they were going to stand behind trees, they were going to kill the officers first. It was going to be something that the Europeans just weren't used to. Well, Braddock and his officers felt that Washington had rocks in his head, and of course, when the battle occurred, everything Washington predicted occurred. Braddock himself was killed, most of Braddock's men were killed, and it was left up to Washington and the Virginia militia to get those members of the British Army who survived back to Virginia. Now, this is a map that I borrowed from the American Revolution, but Fort Duquesne would be right about here. Now, I will have it marked with an X by the time we get to the quiz. It's important that you put this on your map. You should have a map for just the French and Indian War and a map for just the American Revolution. Now, I believe your map has an X for this battle. You might notice that I have placed letters on the map as well. C for Charleston, P for Philadelphia, NY for New York, and B for Boston. It was at this time in British history that there is going to be an election. In this election, new members of Parliament are going to be elected, and a new Prime Minister is going to be elected. His name is William Pitt. Now, William Pitt was a very young man. That's why we sometimes refer to him as Pitt the Younger, because there were two William Pitts. Pitt has devised a new strategy to win the war. Now, Pitt believed that the best thing he could do to win the French and Indian War was to capture Quebec. Now, Pitt is going to bypass some of his more senior generals, and he's going to ask Sir General James Wolfe, and notice how Wolfe is spelled, to attack and capture Quebec. Now, Quebec is the capital of New France. It sits high on a hill, and it was considered impregnable. However, Wolfe came up with a plan. Instead of attacking the fort, Wolfe was going to go a couple of miles upstream of Quebec. He was going to have his men climb a high bluff, and then they would be on the Plains of Abraham, which overlooks the fort of Quebec. Wolfe and his men are able to do this. They are able to get on the Plains of Abraham. The French are forced to come out and fight because the Plains of Abraham is rather desolate as far as forest goes. The French are going to have to fight in European style. Now, the British are led by James Wolfe. The French are going to be led by Louis Montcalm, M-O-N-T-C-A-L-M. Now, Montcalm had defeated Braddock at Duquesne, and Wolfe believes he can defeat Montcalm fighting European style. Wolfe is successful. During the battle, Montcalm is killed, and the French are forced to surrender. Unfortunately for Wolfe, he too is killed during the battle. If you ever go to London, to the British War Museum, there's a very famous picture called The Death of Wolfe at the Battle of Quebec. Now, this next slide talks about this pivotal battle. I'd like to show it to you, but I'm afraid YouTube would block it. So I'm going to move on from there. Now, it lasts about 5 minutes. Now, Quebec would be located right about in here on the St. Lawrence River. Now, again, on your map, you should have it marked out with the letter X. Now, when we get ready to take the Quiz 3 war, not only will the French and Indian War battles be placed, but also the American Revolution. So it will get a bit confusing. Both sides agreed to meet in Paris in 1763. Now, normally I could care less if you remember dates, but in American history, we like to meet in Paris to come up with treaties to end wars. So in my notes, I'm going to write the Treaty of Paris, and then in brackets, I'm going to write 1763, because less than 20 years later, we're going to write the same treaty, but a different year for the surrender of the British during the American Revolution. Well, what exactly did the French have to give up? The French had to give up all lands in North America. Now, that would be New France. That would also be Louisiana. The land along the Ohio River would revert to the British Crown. Now, almost immediately, some of the Native American tribes who had been nice with the French are going to start an uprising. One of them is led by Chief Pontiac. And Pontiac's uprising is so ferocious that the Crown is going to say to the colonies, you can't send any more colonists into the Ohio River Valley. Now, of course, did the colonies have any control over their people? And the short answer was no. And so people continue to stream into the area, and Pontiac is going to continue his uprising. Parliament is going to pass the Proclamation of 1763. Now, the Proclamation of 1763 claims that all of the land on either side of the Ohio River Valley and part of the land that is above the Great Lakes belongs to the Crown. And the Crown is going to use this land to pay off debts. Now, this flies in the face of what the colonies thought. The colonies had participated in the French and Indian War on the British sides. They had assumed that some of the Ohio River Valley would be given to them. Colonies like Virginia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New York, even Massachusetts were incredibly upset. And this Proclamation of 1763 is going to get a lot of colonies meeting and a lot of colonies saying that they don't like what the British are doing. Now, this isn't going to cause the American Revolution, but generally, when we talk about the American Revolution and why there was an American Revolution, this is usually one of the things that goes on our list. The Spanish, who had allied with France, were given the land on the western side of the Mississippi River and given control of New Orleans. Now, Spain had originally claimed this land for themselves. We know they did nothing with it, and Marquette and Joliet and LaSalle are going to claim this land for France and call it Louisiana. Finally, the Treaty of Paris of 1763 is going to give to Great Britain Florida. This way it's pretty easy. Anything east of the Mississippi River belongs to Great Britain. Anything west of the Mississippi River is going to belong to Spain. And France is shut out of everything. The war had been incredibly expensive. Now, William Pitt, who had come up with a plan to win the war, has stepped down as prime minister. And what we're going to see over the course of the next year are a group of prime minister who comes up with plans to pay off the debt. And they're going to pay off the debt by making the colonies pay for the French and Indian War. Well, this is going to go over like a ton of bricks. And eventually we're going to have the American Revolution. So the rest of this lesson is going to concentrate on the various acts of the British to pay off the war. Now, it's important that you keep them in chronological order. It's important that you write into your notes who the prime minister was when this was settled. And eventually we will end with the first shots of the American Revolution. Then in lesson 6 we will look at the Revolution and the various battles. Now, anytime we talk about a war, you need to know where the battles are, you need to know who the generals are, and what was the basic outcome of the war.